BCN are with us today for this spotlight session. Welcome to Emma Portlock and Joshua Whiteley-Pole and Rowan Gill, who are on the call with us. This session, as you probably already know since you're here, is entitled the Azure Well-Architected Framework. And the session aims to provide a practical review that helps strengthen the security, resilience, and scalability across our cloud's client journeys. We also aim to make these webinars more technical than the partner sessions we have at the conference. And hopefully, without giving too much away, the aim of today is to show how to run structured health checks against a client's Azure estate to reveal common gaps that often exist post-migration in areas such as security, resilience, governance, and operational readiness, that kind of thing. And in turn, this enables the production of some form of prioritized improvement plan that can be shared with the client and create the next phase of work, perhaps, that you would be working on and strategically driving while BCN delivered, perhaps. Hopefully, by the end of this session, you'll have a repeatable way to position a well-architected review and understand a bit more about the typical problem patterns that are seen post-migration, and understand how a stronger Azure foundation creates the runway for modernization in our clients. As usual, the format is presentation from BCN, followed by an opportunity to ask questions. To avoid interruption, if you do have a question whilst we're going on, please place it in the chat, and I will collate those and bring these out, or Emma will, whichever one of us gets to them first. And we'll bring those out during the Q&A session. There'll also be an opportunity for people to ask questions directly, and you can do that by raising your hand. In today's modern Teams, they actually put a number against the hand, which means we'll get to them in the right order. So I hope you enjoy this session today, and without any more chat from me, over to Emma and Joshua.
Amazing. Thank you, Steve, and lovely to see so many friendly faces. And for those of you that haven't met me before, I'm just going to be I'm just putting up our slides, and just as a little intro to me, first off, for those of you that don't know me, I'm head of new business here at BCN, and I also look after the Freeman Clark relationship, because you're a much valued partner of ours. So for those of you that haven't met me, lovely to meet you, and for those of you that are faces that I haven't spoken to in a while, lovely to catch up with you again. Josh, do you just want to give an intro as to who you are first, and then we'll get cracking?
Yeah, so nice to meet you all. I'm Josh. I'm the Azure Sales Specialist here at BCN. I've got about 18 years in the industry, sort of leveraging on-premise solutions into cloud architecture, Azure, GCP, AWS, doing bespoke design, architecture, software solutions, etc., especially in the enterprise architecture and space. So that's me in a nutshell.
Excellent, thank you. And just assuming everyone can see my slides. Excellent. Brilliant. So today's session is going to be technical. Therefore, for those of you that know me, is definitely not going to be led by me. It's going to be led by Josh. And we're going to, as Steve mentioned, structure it all around the Azure Well-Architected Framework, which is a Microsoft framework. And we're going to actually kind of work on giving you a practical view of how this can help customers that are either still haven't made the jump into cloud, or ones that did it and maybe rushed doing it because of things like COVID, or ones that even did it properly that you can then go back and review. So that's going to be the kind of core piece of it, showing how it can be resilient, scalable, and get you guys the value that you already provide your customers to actually even further ingrain you in the types of stuff that you do. As Steve mentioned, do pop questions in the chat as we go along. So we know that you guys are absolutely all over getting people into cloud, understanding those Azure migrations. It's absolutely your bread and butter. This whole session is what happens then. Or it might be that they haven't made that move yet, and this is a good place to start. But we're going to assume that most customers have made some sort of a move into the cloud. So it's all about, when you make that move, like keeping the lights on and making sure that you constantly have those kind of hardware refreshes, SLAs, tickets, all of those types of things, but then adding on to that, what have you got around security, data, AI, and being able to do things at pace? So we're going to take it from the perspective of, we've already got you into the cloud. What can we then do to make you better, more succinct, more secure, so that you're ready for AI, as we know everyone is talking about it? So why is it now? Why are we doing this now? We're seeing it across the board with our customers that we've already moved to Azure, or prospects that are coming to us saying, can we review their Azure? Migration, as we all know, right, it's the start of the cloud journey. It's not the end. There's constant refines you can be doing, things you can be changing. There could be drift. They could have internally been playing with Azure, lighting things up, and Josh and I are working together on numerous customers at the moment where we're then doing that kind of next level, the next iteration. So it's something that we're finding across the board. So we hope and think that this would be really useful for you guys as well. So I'm now going to be quiet and hand, which will be amazing for those of you that know me, and I'm going to hand over to Josh to then take you through some of the more detail of the information. So over to you, Josh. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so just to dive into this a little bit further, when we talk about getting people into sort of the Azure architecture, the lift and shifts, we're talking about how they've traditionally moved into cloud platforms. So most Azure estates are built to get through migration, not run well in the long term. So it's normally a knee-jerk reaction to a compelling event or a need. So and that's how it normally lands into Azure. So it's not designed to scale or evolve or be governed properly over time. It could be from initial migrations, could be something that's done very time sensitively, so hardware refresh, data center exit, or pressure to get workloads off legacy kits quickly. So the focus is on speed and continuity rather than what should this look like long term. So what this means in practice is you end up with workloads landing in Azure in a way that mirrors what existed before. And then over the next 12 to 24 months, more gets added, more dependencies appear, and the original structure isn't revisited. So you end up with everything in one place: production, dev, identity, networking, all sitting together. It works, but every change carries more risk than it should, and it becomes harder to answer quite basic questions. Who owns this? What does it cost? What happens if this breaks? So for yourselves, this is typically what you probably inherit. So not day one architecture. So you might walk into a customer and look at their environment and then go, right, what have I got here effectively? And this tends to be something that's evolved quickly and isn't fit for where the business is heading. So it's not a case of they've done something wrong. It's just a case of they've done their best effort. They've got into the cloud and now they're stuck or struggling with the next steps, and they need advice on that. So basically, when you come to advise, what we're looking at doing is putting in a structure or a principle, shall I say, a cloud journey around how you could push for faster change or bigger transformation, or if there's any underlying structure that may need change or the change is classed as risky. Okay, so I'll just take you through how that looks like on the lift and shift start of the journey. So Emma, next slide, please. So the shift we're talking about here is not a redesign for the sake of it. It's about introducing structure so the change becomes safer, ownership's clearer, and governance more consistent. A lot of organizations feel like they've done the cloud already because they've already done the migration. But in reality, what they've done is move the same architecture onto a different platform. So they've taken what was on-premise in a data center on a physical bit of kit and then just repeated that architecture back into the cloud. So you still have traditional patterns just hosted in Azure. The things that actually drive value in cloud, so the governance, cost control, operational maturity haven't caught up yet. This is where we see the gaps start to show up. Costs are hard to explain, security is inconsistent, operations rely on individuals rather than systems, and things like data and AI initiatives start to stall because the platform underneath isn't ready. For you, this is a real advisory opportunity because your clients don't need more cloud, they need their cloud to work properly. They need to move from it runs to it's secure by default. We understand what it costs. We can change things without breaking anything. and it supports what the business wants to do next. And that shift doesn't happen automatically after migration. It has to be deliberate. Next slide, Emma.
Perfect, thank you. So so we're kind of given a perspective now on where clients might be in their journey, why this might be appropriate for them, and how it can then help. So the next part that we're going to talk through is, what is this framework? What is the well-architected framework? What does it actually mean in plain terms? And the 5 pillars that exist within that, an overview of what those are. So Josh is just going to take you through those now. Over to you, Josh.
Yeah. So on the last 2 slides, I talked about, I described a pattern that you'll all recognise. Environments that were moving quickly, that work, but over time become harder to govern, harder to change safely, and harder to explain in terms of risk and cost. The well-architected framework is a structured lens we use to make that situation measurable and actionable. It's Microsoft's way of assessing an Azure estate across 5 pillars with one objective: creating modular, by design, understandable environments that can actually be trusted. And the reason this matters to you is simple. You often step into environments mid-journey. You need a repeatable way to form an opinion quickly, explain it clearly, and then turn it into an improvement plan that the organization can execute. Rather than treating the pillars as theory, the simplest way to think about them is this. They are 5 checks that tell whether the platform can safely support what the business wants next, keeping services stable, reducing risk, controlling costs, improving delivery speed, and creating the runway for modernization, data, and AI. So if we jump into the first pillar, security. Security is about whether protection is built in by default or whether it depends on people remembering to do the right thing each time. In practice, this usually shows up around identity and access, separation between environments, and whether the estate has actually got consistent guardrails. When things have grown quickly, the common pattern is inconsistent, different teams doing different things, and exceptions become the norm. The reason this matters in advisory terms is it determines whether stakeholders can have the confidence in the platform as it grows, especially when new services, suppliers, or data use cases get added. The next pillar is reliability. Reliability is what happens when something breaks. Not whether the service has been stable so far, but whether the platform has been designed to handle failure in a predictable way. In a lot of post-migration estates, the lift is complete, but the resilience is still largely inherited from legacy patterns. Recovery is often assumed rather than deliberate, and designed and proven. This is the pillar where the conversation becomes concrete: how availability is achieved, how recovery is approached, and whether there is confidence in the platform can tolerate incidents without turning it into a major event. So the one that everyone tends to focus on as well, which is the cost optimization. Everyone likes to talk about costs, especially in Azure. Cost optimization is frequently misunderstood as reduced spend. In this context, it's really about cost clarity and cost control. Can the organization see what it is spending, understand what it is driving at, and attribute it in a meaningful way? When everything is in one place, cost becomes difficult to explain. And when cost is hard to explain, it's hard to govern. The pillar brings discipline to that conversation: visibility first, then control, then optimization. On to the next pillar. Operational excellence is where the day-to-day friction usually lives. It's the operating model pillar. Are changes repeatable and controlled? Are environments observable? And is it the platform being run in a consistent way? In estates that grow quickly, the pattern is manual processes and dependencies on key individuals, which makes change slower and riskier than it needs to be. This pillar is what turns cloud from something the team supports into something that the organization can run reliably at scale. And then the last pillar, last but not least, I should say, performance efficiency, is the future-proofing pillar. It's about whether the platform can scale with demand and adapt as requirements change. When this is weak, teams compensate with over-provisioning, reactive scaling, or repeated rework. That tends to surface when growth accelerates, when modernization starts, or when data and AI initiatives are introduced and the foundations are not quite ready. This pillar focuses on designing for change, so the platform does not become a blocker. The useful part is that this isn't just a set of labels. There's a structured, well-architected review that turns these pillars into a consistent set of questions and recommendations. So instead of a broad, we should improve the platform, conversation becomes: what are the biggest gaps? What trade-offs are being made today? And what should be prioritized first? And that's how this fits into the bigger story. Migration gets workloads running, while architected is the way you assess what comes next. So the platform becomes safer to operate, easier to govern, more predictable commercially, and ready for modernization and innovation going forward. Next slide.
Okay, amazing. Thanks, Josh. So what we've then done at BCN is, so we've taken that well-architected framework with the pillars as Josh has gone through, and then taken it ourselves to actually look at what does that cloud journey look like? Where are you as a customer or as a consultant into a customer on that end-to-end journey? And we've split that into our own 5 pillars, you'll be pleased to hear, that go through migrate, stabilize, optimize, modernize, innovate. So we've mapped it to those pillars that Microsoft have got as part of the framework, on then what we would apply at what stage depending on where the customer is. So I'm just going to hand over to Josh, who's just going to go into each of these stages in a bit more detail.
Okay. So yeah, like Emma said, we've basically taken the well-architected framework, and then we've also gone and had a look at where our customers are, what's the common patterns, where are they on that journey. And we all like talking about journeys, whether it be digital transformation, IT roadmap, so on and so forth. So I've sort of broken this down into sort of 5 key areas. Now, I'll start with just a high-level overview of these 5 key areas and talk a bit about the migrate before jumping into the other 4, shall I say. So this slide here, to put it simple, shape the journey around organizations. And when we talk about cloud as one event, in reality, it's a direction of travel, and the value is not evenly spread across that journey either. There are 5 key stages: migrate, stabilize, optimize, and modernize, and innovate. Migrate, this is getting workloads into Azure safely and on schedule. For organizations not yet in the cloud, this is where a lot of the early pain sits. The key point is that migrations do not have the means to do this in a controlled way with the right guardrails in place and a clear target state. So you do not arrive in Azure in a stabilized or optimized way, effectively, and you inherit a bigger problem. Stabilize, this is where the platform becomes safe to run and safe to change. So this is where we introduce guardrails, identity, backup, governance, monitoring. Is this point where data operations stop being fragile and the environment becomes something teams can rely on. Optimize, this is where things become predictable. So we start adding in automation, standardization, resilience, cost control. So this means less manual effort, fewer surprises, and the platform behaves consistently as it grows. Modernize, this is where you reduce what has to be managed. So when I talk about modernization, it's talking about getting them off of the traditional architecture type, so VMs and stuff like that, into sort of more PaaS related services. And I'll go through some of the benefits of that on the actual modernized slide as well. And then the last but not least, this is probably the one that everyone wants to start at. This is the one that everyone wants to look at first, and they tend to forget what the foundation is. So innovate is the runway for data and AI and automation and new capabilities, but built on foundations that can take the weight. If the earlier stages are weak, innovation tends to turn into expensive rework. So on this, there's 2 important points depending on where the client is starting from. First, for clients already in Azure, the conversation is usually, where are we on this journey today? And what is the next best step? Most of the value is in the post-migration stages, where drift gets corrected and the platform becomes trustworthy. Second, it's for clients not yet in Azure. This journey is not always a slow step-by-step crawl. With the right approach, it is often possible to migrate and stabilize as part of the same program. And in some cases, optimize and modernize decisions can be pulled forward too. You can land in a much better place than a pure lift and shift outcome if the scope and timelines and constraints allow it. That said, there are also times where the right move is to lift and shift first, then modernize in the second phase. That is usually when speed and risk reduction are the priority, and you want to get out of the data center or legacy kit first, then come back to improve and modernize once the pattern is stable and understood. So this model is not a rigid process. It is a way to structure the conversation, pick up the right sequencing, and avoid the trap of treating migrations as the finish line. So with that journey in mind, we'll zoom into the post-migration stages, starting with stabilize, because is the foundation for everything that comes after it. So stabilize is about guardrails and operational confidence. Oh, yeah, there we go. Stabilize is about guardrails and operational confidence. It reduces risk, enables controlled growth, and gives teams confidence to make changes without crossing fingers. The easiest way to think about stabilize is to put the rules of the road in place so the platform behaves predictably as it grows. There are 6 areas we typically focus on. Security and access control is secure by default. Baselines, secure default, segmentation, and access that is variable, not assumed. Governance and policy is consistent. Naming, tagging, policy, not bureaucracy, just the basics that stop drift. So we're putting in that policy as the guardrails to stop that drift from happening. Cost visibility is transparent, show back, tagging by purpose, anomaly alerts, so spend is explainable before anyone tries to optimize it first. Identity focus is treating identity as the control plane, so privileged access is controlled and auditable, so added in things like PIMs, just-in-time access, even PAMs in some cases. Backup and recovery is confidence, not just we have backups. Restores are tested, recovery objectives to agreed, and resilience against ransomware is all defined. So we're putting in our RPOs, our RTOs, and defining our runbooks for any case scenario. And monitoring is the operational view of the world, alerts, telemetry that teams can actually rely on. The tie-up on this slide is simple. Stabilize is the foundation for everything else. Without it, optimization becomes guesswork, modernizations become higher risk change, and innovation becomes rework. Once those foundations are in place, the next step is making the platform more predictable and efficient at scale. That's optimize. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
That's
there you
right,
go.
No. So stabilize puts the guardrails in place, optimizes where the platform starts to behave predictably. This is the stage that delivers what most clients actually feel day to day: predictable costs, resilience under load, and less manual toil. There are 4 practical levers here. Automation over manual. This is where repeatability shows up. Infrastructure as code, pipelines, runbooks. The point is not the tools, it's the common tasks stop living in people's heads and starts being done in the same way every time. That is how change becomes safer and faster. Standardization, this is where everyone has their own way, there's a proven way, reference designs, reusable models, golden pathways. The benefit is pace. Teams move quicker because they are not reinventing the basics every time. HA by design plus DR thinking. This is where resilience becomes deliberate, not a diagram, not an intention. It's a designing availability and recovery into the platform and proving it works so instances are contained rather than becoming major events. Cost optimization and forecasting. This is where cost becomes controllable and predictable. Right sizing, auto scale, reservations where it makes sense, and spotting waste early. The focus is fewer surprises, clearer accountability, and spend that matches intent. So optimize is what turns clouds that runs into cloud that runs well. It reduces friction, reduces risk, and creates the operating baseline that makes modernization far less painful. Once things are predictable, the next lever is reducing what has to be managed day to day. That's where modernization comes in. On to the next slide, please. Yeah. So modernization is the point where the conversation shifts from how do we run what we have to how do we reduce what we have to run or what we have to manage. Up to this stage, a lot of estates are still operating in a server-shaped way, just hosted in Azure. Modernizes the move away from that. It is choosing the platform services where it makes sense, so the platform carries more of the heavy lifting. The visuals on this slide is really the story. On the left-hand side is the stack that the client owns, and end-to-end, the application, the VMs, the networking, the OS, the configuration, the runtime, the libraries, patching, updates. That is a lot of surface area to keep secure, keep available, and keep compliant. On the right is the shift. The focus stays on the application and what differentiates the business, and more of the underlying layers become Microsoft managed. That is where the benefits compound. So 3 practical outcomes here. First is built-in resilience. When services are designed as platform as services, resilience patterns are more baked in rather than being bolted on later. Second is native scale. Scaling becomes something that the platform supports rather than a manual exercise that is hard to test and hard to repeat. Third is less to patch. You reduce the operational overhead that eats time and creates risk because teams are no longer responsible for as many layers of the stack. The story so far is simple. Stable and optimized create confidence and control. Modernize is where you reduce the amount of stack the client has to run, so resilience and scale become built in, and there is simply less to patch and look after. And once more of the stack is platform managed and the foundations are strong, that is what creates the runway to innovate, especially around data, AI, and automation. On to the next slide, please. So innovate is our last step of the journey. It's not the final step. There is always repeatable actions throughout the whole of the journey, as Azure is forever evolving, so there's always something to do. So innovate is where a lot of organizations want to start because it is the exciting part: data, AI, automation, and modern apps. But the point of this slide is simple. Innovation only lands well when the foundations can take the weight. If innovation is pushed too early, the business ends up being held back by yesterday's architecture. It shows up as workarounds, duplicated effort, security concerns, and rework that quietly eats away at value. With the foundations in place, the story changes. Data and AI initiatives do not need a full rebuild to get going. Automation can be introduced without creating chaos, and modern platform services have somewhere sensible to land. The visual is useful because it shows innovation sitting on the top of the same 5 foundations: security, reliability, cost, operations, and performance. Those do not disappear when new capabilities arrive. They become more important. And that is the practical message for clients. Innovation is not a separate program. It is the outcome of doing the earlier stages well. So when people talk about Fabric, AI Foundry, Copilot, automation, modern applications, the real question is whether the platform underneath it is ready for it. If it is, those things accelerate delivery. If it is not, they usually expose gaps. And the final step is making sure the foundations do not drift back over time. That is where DevOps automation and treating the estate like code becomes the engine, which is the next slide. Emma, did you want to talk about anything?
I was just going to say on this innovate piece, I'm finding 90% of either current prospects that I'm talking to or people coming through inbound contacting us are wanting to do all these bits, and I genuinely hadn't realize the impact of the kind of well-architected framework underneath the Azure piece. So we've done a Fabric talk with you guys. You've all met Fraser, and Fabric is incredible. The Power BI stuff is incredible. It hadn't really occurred to me because I don't have the specialist knowledge in Azure and the whole infrastructure piece of how much an impact of actually having these building blocks in place in Azure is super important and will really help and scale that kind of data AI journey that I'm sure that loads of your customers are talking to you about. And we're obviously doing the dinner, Steve, that's all around AI. And it's kind of just really honing in that if we get this bit right, that makes that element so much easier because it doesn't sit within Fabric. It actually sits within your Azure foundations. So I think that's where this innovate piece is really key. Sorry, I will hand back to you now, Josh, on your DevOps.
No problem at all. So basically thought I'd add in the DevOps automation slide. DevOps is more interesting when it comes to Azure infrastructure, and it's something that a lot of people are talking about, and it's picked up over the years quite heavily as well, especially around this sort of the infrastructure as code. So when I talk about DevOps, I talk about DevOps as an application side and how a lot of DevOps teams are actually deploying the application, how they can maintaining it, how they're controlling it, and basically doing all their CI/CD. But then there's also the other side of it, which is sort of the DevOps platform side, which is sort of the infrastructure as code, whether that's Terraform, Bicep, but actually managing your infrastructure as code. So on this slide, it's really about preventing drift. So once you've done everything, once you've completed the journey, you've completed the modernization, the innovate, and then you've left them alone effectively. It's to stop that from drifting back. It's to stop having that repeatable project in a couple of years' time where they've added more to the estate or they've changed things into the estate and then it becomes a mess again and then you have to go and re-sort it out. So the idea is simple. It's to treat the Azure estate like code. Infrastructure as code, pipelines and policy as code. Take well-architected off the page and into the day-to-day delivery process. Instead of a review being an occasional audit, it becomes something that happens every time a change happens. That is the compounding effect. Each improvement persists, the estate gets better with every release, and rather than gradually getting messier again, there are 4 practical outcomes to call out. First is the repeatable deployments. So when infrastructure is defined as code, you can reproduce environments, review changes, and avoid one-off configuration surprises. I have got an example of this with one of our current clients in one of the later slides as well, and I can talk you through that. Second is safer releases. So CI/CD with the right checks means the changes are gated, tested, and traceable. So instead of just deploying straight over to the application or the actual platform, things are checked, they're controlled, they're auditable, which then means that you get faster delivery, fewer incidents, and a clear audit trail. Third, operational confidence. When deployments are consistent and observable, incidents reduce, and when they do happen, diagnosing them becomes faster because changes are known and recorded. And fourth, you can bake in the guardrails. So policies and controls are built into the pipeline, so the platform stays well architected as it grows, rather than relying on people remembering the standards after the fact. So when you've gone in, you've put in the naming conventions, you've put in the policy management, you've said effectively, here's the tagging policy as well. These are what's managed by Terraform, by Bicep effectively. And if they're tagged in prod, dev, you can't then just spin up resource that's tagged as dev in prod, and you can't do prod in dev. So it stops that from happening. It stops that drift and that segmentation from happening as well. So those are some of the use cases for around DevOps. And that's how it all ties into the journey. Yeah, so with that in place, we can move from the framework and the journey into real examples from the field.
Yeah, and I think, and thanks for that, Josh. So, I mean, obviously what Josh has taken us through there is, you know, why would this be a thing? Why is it an additional value that you could bring to your clients? Where are they on their journey? What are we trying to do? What does that framework look like? What building blocks do we have in place to kind of support that? And I think what we now want to do is then just give some examples of real life customers. You know, I'm working with Josh on multiple customers at the moment because I wasn't aware as an account manager that these things were available. So we're just going to bring it to life with some real examples of what the problem that the customer had or what they were seeing, how we then positioned it, and some of the outcomes that they've seen. So yeah, just going to take you through some of that. And this first one is one that we've been working on together for a few months now. It's quite an interesting one, isn't it, Josh? They had South African tenant looking to migrate and bring everything under a UK banner. But Josh then positioned the well-architected framework, and it brought out a load of other things that even they weren't aware of. So maybe just talk us through a little bit in more detail, Josh.
So on this one, it was literally one subscription. It's an historical dev house, and all the problems that would normally arise from a dev house, where they've basically designed solutions, built architecture, built applications on top of each other, and it needs must effectively, and they've just grown and accelerated at pace to the point where they were about 25 grand a month in Azure consumption in one subscription. So that's all their prod, all their dev, the sandbox, tests, Q&A, staging, everything was in one place. There was a lot of technical depth within that subscription as well, because there's a lot of resources that they weren't sure that were being used. Was there dependencies on them? Could they get rid of them? And some of that was actually quite expensive as well, because some of the resources like Cosmos DB, managed SQL instances, stuff like that do drive up the price, and then also the login against that as well. So without restructuring and redeploying that architecture and putting it into sort of a modular by design approach, it becomes very hard to manage, especially when you've got a dev house consistently working on it, bringing out new applications, new applications for customers, working on new customer features, etc. and then along with your own internal estate as well. So the idea here was to take that, break it into sort of a structured approach using the well-architected framework and go in. So here's all of our management structure of the tree, break out sort of the subscriptions for the platform services, so connectivity, identity management, security, have them live in different subscriptions, build the connectivity sub out to actually introduce firewall and security controls around that, because they had no firewall in place and they had no ingress or centralized ingress egress as well in the subscription. So we then brought all that into a hub and spoke model as well. So we now can go through sort of cybersecurity essentials plus ISO 27001. We've also then looked at their identity as well, how they're accessing the resources, bringing in stuff like global secure access as well, so that developers can access those resources privately from their own devices. There was a lot to do there, and as we continue through it, there's more that comes out. There's a lot of inherent or legacy architecture as well, when we're talking about engines and how we scale those engines out, where they basically spun up 20 different VMs, but they all have the same job, and that's their scaling methodology and their load balancing, because those VMs can't auto scale and they can't come online by themselves, etc. So we've now started to look at sort of the AKS microservices deployment around the containers and pushing all that engine into that so that it can scale and expand and shrink as and when it's needed. So there's a fair bit there, and that's obviously shown some cost savings as well, because we're consolidating their architecture type. We're getting rid of a lot of legacy tech debt as well in the environment, and it's also made it a lot easier for them to manage. We've put in some CI/CD pipeline in, checks, gates, balances as well, so that they can start progressing and deploying things with confidence, without having to worry about breaking everything. And if something doesn't work, they've got clear staging gates as well to say, look, this isn't ready for production, so we're going to roll it back. So that's all in place for them at the moment, and that was quite a large project, but it showcases why having the foundations are correct. And since those have now gone in, we're also talking to them about AI fabric, what's the next step, how do we do system orchestration as well, and then the digital transformation piece on top of that.
And a SIEM SOC as well. So they're looking at a full security, because now they've got an infrastructure that is spitting out alerts. They need a process by which to manage it, and a service. So, okay, thank you. And then you've got a second one that I haven't been involved in. It's not one of my customers.
So again, this is another company that have started in Azure with the best intentions. They actually lifted and shifted from a on-premise environment as part of a demerger. So they basically split out from some of the parent companies, and they got left with a lot of legacy tech debt. Didn't know what a lot of it was, how it connected. When we did the sort of well-architected framework, it was all in one subscription again. Prod, dev didn't really exist. There was just a couple of dev resources, but then they were leveraging prod resources as well. So it became quite messy there. And there's also a lot of stranded resource from the demerger as well, where they weren't entirely sure what it was doing. So we had to go through and actually start looking at what are these for, what are they used for. We found out a lot of it wasn't connected, and they were just basically left with a lot of technical debt there. On that side, we decided, we talked to them because they're very interested in not getting back to that state again and want it all managed. They want to have the guardrails in place. They want to focus on what they do best day in, day out, which is their applications, their design, their features, etc. So they don't want to be managing the infrastructure. So what we've done is we've spoken about DevOps, infrastructure as code, and redeploying the whole of the Azure landing zone within Terraform, and getting that all structured out, which is now complete. And then we've effectively spun up the resources within Terraform as well, within Azure using Terraform. And we're managing those resources as well going forward, and we're managing them through tags. We're also doing the disaster recovery through Terraform as well, because they have quite a high, they basically what, if anything happens to the region, can they spin it up? And can they spin it up without a lot of configuration drift? What's actually important to them? So their disaster recovery tiering, and that's all tagged and then coded and done through workflows through infrastructure as code as well to spin up in a secondary region when's needed. So it saves them a lot of money around sort of Azure Site Recovery. They understand that there is time for that code to actually run. So that's probably going to be 3 to 4 hours recovery time to run that, deploy all the resources, restore the data, the backups, etc., and get them back up and running. However, that means we've templated all their workloads and their environment off. So what they're seeing is they've got multiple dev environments as well, where they're tearing down the dev environments and then basically pressing a button or filling out a form, starting that workflow off, and it's rebuilding their dev environment back to the sort of the golden state so that they can work and play and test on that environment as and when needed. Also with confidence that they don't have to worry about breaking anything, or as they're going through the dev environment, if they do break something, they can quite happily tear that down and start again, and they know it's working. It also means that because they're not constantly in development cycle as well and UAT, they can actually tear down the dev and UAT to save them money over time as well, because they can just spin that up as and when needed.
Amazing, thank you. So just as a recap, for those of you that did come to the Microsoft funding session that we did for you guys a few months back, there is funding from Microsoft to complement this. Even if customers are already in Azure, you're still able, if they meet the right criteria, to tap into this funding. It's not insignificant. The assessment funding is £11,000. The migration funding can be anywhere from 2 to 80,000, but you can imagine what you'd be having to spend if you're on 80,000, because it's all related to what consumption a customer has. But again, because of the designations and specializations that we've got, these are pockets of funding that are available as well, and we'll be able to advise if a customer is suitable or eligible for them. The assessment piece is kind of directly linked to the well-architected framework piece. It kind of complements it really well, because it's able to then kind of look at what you're doing, how's it set out. If you're migrating, what does that migration look like? We're doing loads of Google migrations at the moment for some reason, and it's probably because of AI and stuff, right? People are being told Google hasn't got the right kind of security levels, etc. And then the core migrate and modernize is just a fancy way of saying just to basically help offset some of the migration costs or some of the implementation costs that you might have. So this was just as a reminder that funding does exist. And there we've come to the end of our allotted 45 minutes for talking at you. So I guess, where do you go from here? Our offer to you guys is, if you've got customers where you think that this kind of review would benefit them, Josh is very happy to give you an hour of his time, you and your customers, an hour of his time to go through the fundamentals of this well-architected review. He's able, through kind of read-only access, to take a look, to get his head under the covers a bit, and have a look for you. And so, that's kind of, if you think you've got customers at the moment that would really benefit from this, they've either been on cloud for a while or they've just started the journey, and you think it's a good time to intervene and just take a look, we're here to actually, help you do that. And most of what Josh has said today, I literally don't understand a word, which is good, but you can probably see his level of technical ability. He really gets this stuff inside out and back to front, and certainly the customers that I've been working with him on really see value from this. So I don't see any questions at the moment, but I have never ever known a Freeman Clark meeting where I don't get any questions. Has anyone got anything they'd either like to comment, ask?
Could we stop sharing the slide so we can see everybody in a bit more detail?
Yep, bear with me 1 second. There we go.
Marvellous. So now we can more easily see. Oh, well,
yeah.
Linda straight away has got a question there.
The only person asking a question.
You're on mute at the moment, Linda.
Ooh.
No, you're all right now.
Okay.
No, you're all right now.
Okay, I can't believe I'm the only person asking a question. I had a question on the kind of roles that companies should have to be able to handle Azure. So I inherited an Azure estate that had been run by people who primarily had on-prem experience, and therefore all of the things that you mentioned were not in place. And I spent the next year putting them in place and backward architecting the well-architected framework, if you like. And it struck me that I just didn't have the right skill set with the team I had. What are but because the cloud is so new, I'm not sure that those roles are fully formed. So what are the roles that you need in your team for people that are performing all those activities, but crucially keeping it up to date? Because that maintenance and documentation that my team didn't really seem very keen on at the time is really important to stop it going awry. But what are the roles that help you manage and maintain that well-architected framework that a company should have?
Yeah, so on our side, because we do a lot of on-premise and there's a lot of in-house IT expertise normally centered around traditional style of architecture, which you've experienced. A lot of the time we spend a lot of time upskilling. So as we're going through the transformation project, or we're going through doing the migration, stabilize, optimize, we're showcasing this by doing all the documentation, doing showcases with them, hand holding them through the experience, explaining what this means, what that means, how to then do something. And this comes very primarily because we've shifted from traditional migrating sort of the realms of DevOps and infrastructure as code. A lot of companies are looking at it, go, I understand cloud, I understand going into the portal and clicking and deploying a VM. I might not get the whole back end with the network architecture, the security, so on and so forth. However, I'm very interested in DevOps and getting that guardrails in place. So we're doing a lot of upskilling around DevOps as well. So at the moment, we'll help whatever team is in place currently to upskill and then take over and also manage that going forward. We can also manage it. But to answer your question around what roles I would normally expect to see in a business to manage Azure, it'll be mostly the enterprise architect, or you're talking solution architects around network security, infrastructure, cloud engineers, Azure engineer. They are predominantly the main ones. And then you've also got Azure DevOps engineers as well, or just DevOps engineers for the infrastructure as code stuff as well.
But what we find, Linda, is main reason people are talking to, obviously we do this element, but it's then how do we keep this up to date? How do we know what the best of the best is? And that's why people, when we do this, we add in our Azure Managed Service to then provide that, right? So that there's that constant, we support the organization, not only in terms of tickets and support and downtime, but that constant refreshing and making sure they don't end up in 2 years in the place they were at and we have to do the whole exercise again. So that's why there's usually that kind of monthly ongoing container that we have.
And it's also
just to carry on from Linda's question, a lot of our clients don't actually have an in-house IT function. So, in those circumstances, I think what you said, Emma, was that you could actually provide the services and capability to underpin this if the decision was made by our CIO, CTO to go down this route, that you don't need an in-house team because BCN could actually cover that off.
Yeah. Or if there is already, and also just to say, if there's an incumbent already that is their ticketing MSP, traditional MSP, we can work alongside that. The client, the first slide that we showed on our client, they have an incumbent MSP. We work alongside them as the Azure, deep skilled specialist.
Sure. I mean, sorry, Linda,
I have one more if nobody else is asking.
Yeah, crack on.
Just very quickly. Azure is not infallible and does go down occasionally. It's rare, but it happens, and it can be out for 2 or 3 hours at a time. If you are not rich enough or wealthy enough to have a multi-cloud strategy so you can switch over to different clouds, how do you deal with that now?
So
it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's pretty brutal.
Yeah, and then it also affects others. So like when we saw last year when AWS went down in the US, it affected Azure services, it affected Cloudflare, then that affected other parts, because you have predominantly Azure is one piece. Azure is designed to do a lot of it, and you can do everything within sort of the Microsoft tech stack, but then there's sort of best in breed. So like instead of having Azure front door, you might have Cloudflare, so on and so forth. We're just noticing a lot of the cloud services are interlinked, and that if one goes down as a major outage, it does have service degradation to the others. Majority of the time, when we talk about disaster recovery and sort of business continuity, we do multiple different plans around that. So for one of the clients at the moment I'm looking at, which is a housing association, they've got a web live portal. Now, they don't want to spin up an active session where they have multi-region or multi-cloud tenant, because they're basically paying for the same architecture twice over, which is quite expensive when you start talking about enterprise architecture. Now, some of the ideas we floated past them was having a load balancer and splitting the load between two regions on the active-active, so they're both doing work, and you can actually make the resource smaller on both sides because you're sharing the load across two regions, but still, that's still an additional cost. We talked about Azure Site Recovery, infrastructure as code, Terraform, basically being able to spin up the infrastructure again in Azure. Terraform can also be used as a multi-tenant or multi-cloud code base. So unlike Bicep, which is just for sort of Microsoft, Terraform does also go across AWS and GCP. So you could have a backup strategy to go into another cloud. A lot of the time it's about what risk appetite they have and identifying the business criticality of the applications. So I start to talk to them about DR tier tagging. So DR tier 1, DR tier 2, DR tier 3, and then going, if something goes wrong, which are the applications that need to be up now? Which ones need 99.9995% uptime? Because that's Microsoft's uptime metric. And then how do we approach this? And there's different approaches, like I said, for those two. But then also, if you don't want to do regional, we can do zonal redundancy, especially around PaaS resources as well, where Microsoft takes the resource themselves and takes the management layer, takes on the infrastructure themselves. And then a lot of point-in-time restores, backups, zonal setup or zonal redundancy or geo redundancy is already set up within those PaaS resources. So there's a mixture of things we can do. It's all about understanding what the customer's risk appetite is around that, and then the cost to that. But when this housing association, I went through all of that, and in the end, what we've decided, what they wanted to do was have a zonal redundancy within their main architecture. So if a node went down or a service went down, it would then spin up on different instances effectively or different nodes. However, if that whole region went down, we've effectively used an Azure front door to then do an active health check in the background to see if is this region up or is this region down. If it's not up, then it then reports to a web page to give a static web page to say service is temporarily unavailable, sorry about this. However, we still have degregated features like taking payment, and they can take payment through like this static web page as well. So there's other ways we can sort of work on business continuity and disaster recovery. It's not just a case of having the same architecture up again in another place. It's about how we manage it, how we work with that. It's a conversation I have a lot with our customers at the moment, especially around what happens if it all goes down in Azure. And then I have to point out that, touch wood, I say, is that Azure has only seen service degradation over the last couple of years. There hasn't been a major region outage. Now we've seen issues with Copilot where service degradations come in, Azure front doors come in as well over the last couple of years. We saw a data center get struck by lightning last year in US, and that resulted in some service degradation. It didn't actually result in any downtime. It was just a case while they were exploring and powering and making sure everything was working, they warned us that there might be some service degradation, but there wasn't any. So stuff like that's all in. The days of data centers being flooded, people coming through the internet line in data centers is long gone. There's flood defenses in place. There's multiple power lines going into it, multiple data lines going in. So if something does happen, it fails over to backups. So there's a lot in place now to stop it from happening.
I think we also have to remind our clients that they should have a look in their server closet and decide whether how much their system is likely to go down as well in comparison with a Microsoft service, because they're very different beasts, and people often ignore it when it's sitting in their closet and not in a proper server room, and they start worrying about downtime when it's within somebody else's remit. Shannon, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just went through this process with two different clients talking about the resiliency requirements, and we led the conversation out of the insurance piece because the insurance pricing on various different downtimes for various different pieces was at a certain level, and the business decided how much it wanted to spend, and so that very much informed what we were doing in terms of failovers and different regions and so forth and so on. Also, on another level, on a more human level, it's 2026, and major outages aren't even front page on the news in the newspaper anymore. You know, everyone's, oh, Google's down. You know, it'll be 4 hours. You know, there's a lot more acceptance of business disruptions for these purposes, I think, from the general public at least.
That is a really good point, though, Shannon, that you make. Lots of people are looking at this from a how do we get either our cyber insurance lower or just general indemnity insurance lower, and this can play a key part in that, and it can help build that business case as well. So yeah, really, really good point.
Anybody for one last question before we close? I mean, just one thing from me. I think I've and tell me if I've got this wrong, but I think there's a layer of this that is Microsoft, and there's a layer that is developed by BCN. Is that right? So you've kind of taken it on one step further. Just briefly explain the interface between that. I mean, and how that works. Does the Microsoft bit get done first, and then BCN come and do the next bit, or is it a combined approach? How does that work?
So what I've done effectively is taken the concept of the well-architected framework because the well-architected framework is best practice. Sometimes there's certain things that can't fit into that. So like 30-year-old systems on green screen or Unix trying to go into the cloud, there's certain things you're going to have to make changes for, but we can put it into a structure. So mainly around the concept of that, but then also applying that concept to actual real life scenarios and what the customers are actually doing today. And then understanding where they are on that and how much they understand, and then trying to break it up, because instead of just throwing the well-architected framework at them and saying that this is well-architected framework, there's like 60 questions, there's assessment to do, or run through it, or identify gaps and everything like that, which we still do. It's just in case we choose when to use it. However, if we talk about it as a journey and we talk about where you are on your actual strategy, on your roadmap, I try to identify where they are on that stage, and that's where the customer journey comes in, or the cloud journey that we've developed comes into play, because we can identify how much they understand and where they're lacking, what gaps they have in the knowledge, and we can come in and advise and go, this is what we're looking at doing next, or this is the best way of doing that. What's your ideas on this? And then they'll tell us their ideas and go, have you thought about it this way? If you do this, you're going to have problems further down the line with X, Y, and Z. So it's very much around that consultancy piece and just bringing that structure and foundation in. And that's sort of the concept around it.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Right. That's all, folks. Thanks for coming along today and taking part. Thank you to Emma and Josh for his insight and knowledge in this area. Very interesting. It is much appreciated that you have taken time out of your day to come and talk to us about this. And I'm sure that if any of you on this call have any questions you'd like to raise with Emma or Josh, then they'll be very happy to hear from you. And if you have any other ideas around technical topics that you'd like us to arrange and have done in this kind of format by our partner, please let me or Hannah know. But otherwise, again, thank you very much for coming along. Thank you, Emma and Josh, for leading it through. And we will see you again soon. Take care and have a great long weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.